Good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming today. It's so heartening to see you all joining us today. My name is Reiko Kataoka. I am a senior lecturer in the Department of Linguistics and Language Development at San Jose State University. Today, I will be serving as your host. Before we start the main program, I'd like to talk a little bit about the project, The Meaning of Linguistic Diversity. This is a 2-semester project which is culminating at today's event. This project is funded by the College of Humanities and the Arts with its Artistic Excellence Programming Grant. It is also partnered with 3 community organizations, Japanese American Museum of San Jose, Mosaic America, and the School of Visual Philosophy. And it is also partnered with a student group, Linguistics and Language Development Student Association, or LLDSA, and this is the mascot of the association. Now, as expressed in this theme poster, our project aims to explore what it means to speak one's native language, heritage language, regional and ethnic dialect in our own unique accent. So this is a project of exploration, inquiry, and learning from each other. This project has multiple components. Most of them took place in the past fall semester. The first is the student training component. We have 3 student assistants. All of them completed the online training program to learn responsible and ethical conduct in research and study setting. And these students then took interviews with the 3 community partners. And those interviews were recorded to create a documentary video, which we will see in a moment. At the same time, in classrooms, 3 faculty collaborators engaged their students with linguistic diversity-themed project. We also had on-campus events collaborating with the LLDSA. And finally, we conducted an online survey to learn from our students what kind of experiences and perspectives our students have regarding their native language, heritage language, dialect, and their accent, and what are their perspectives about the linguistic diversity in our community, San Jose. So this is an action-packed project, and that means today's program itself is also action-packed. Today's program starts with an interview video, which lasts about 25 minutes. And this part is followed by the first panel discussion with the student interviewers and community member interviewees who could come today. That interview will be followed by the 3 presentations from faculty members about in-campus activities and curricular integrations. And that presentation will be followed by the second panel discussion with the presenters and our 3 guest panelists. This event will conclude finally with a live performance, multilingual and multicultural immersion by Mosaic America. So now, can you please start the interview video, and everyone please enjoy.
What experiences have you had with language?
My grandfather grew up in a German-speaking household until World War I.
There are a lot of Sanseis I know who speak English only.
This is part of our history that we shouldn't forget about.
We took a lot of time and started to really think about things like what are other cultures, what are dialects within other cultures.
So I want to ask, what does having such a diverse and multicultural background mean to you?
We want to engage with the diversity and bring people together.
I love you in Latvian, es tevi mīlu, and I taught my kids how to say it, and it like warms your heart when they're just like, es tevi mīlu.
We live in a society where many different languages and dialects are spoken. What does this linguistic diversity mean to you? Hello, my name is Reiko Kataoka. I'm a senior lecturer in the Department of Linguistics and Language Development at San Jose State University. This is the video documentary of the interviews that our students had with 3 community organizations in San Jose. These interviews are part of the project, The Meaning of Linguistic Diversity, which was funded by the College of Humanities and the Arts with its Artistic Excellence Programming Grant. For the first interview, we visited the School of Visual Philosophy. The interviewer is Michael Kromenaka, The interviewees are Dana Harris-Seeger and Yori Seeger.
Hi Dana. Hi Yori. Thank you for having me here today. I appreciate your time.
Absolutely.
What can you tell us about your organization?
So we are the School of Visual Philosophy. We are an art studio and school, so we do classes, we do events, we have printmaking facilities and painting and blacksmithing and metal casting.
It's kind of like a Disneyland for artists, but what we really try to do is get artists to allow themselves to be professional and make a living at it, and to understand that art is nothing more than a language. It doesn't necessarily have to go into a gallery or on a pedestal. It's a method of communicating. You were talking about accents before, and how even if you have a bunch of sculptors in one room, you all have your own accent. It's the way that you touch the clay or move the material. It's that relationship that you have with it.
I watched the video that you had on YouTube.
Yeah.
And one of the messages that I came across was that art can vary
Yeah.
from culture to culture.
Oh yeah, big time.
Something as fundamental as a painting can vary completely in,
So
many different ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
Color,
of the way,
yeah.
because of the way they decide to portray.
Yeah.
Shapes and colors.
Shapes and
forms.
colors, certain, like take the color yellow for instance. In some cultures it stands for like cowardice or shame. Some colors it stands for warning. Some are cultures it stands for loyalty. It took me, even going through graduate school and being a professional artist, to realize that my story is unique. My hand, my artwork is just a part of me, and like if I'm going to get comfortable telling my story, I have to own that story. I have to know what I'm saying.
We took a lot of time and started to really think about things like, what are other cultures? What are dialects within other cultures?
We started off talking about the variety, the dialects, the differences in art. And I would like to tie that to language.
Yeah.
What experiences have you had with language?
I grew up in California, where I was told I didn't have an accent, which is silly because everyone does. And then I moved to Indiana when I was 12, which is in the Midwest of the United States. So that's like a completely different, I was culture shock. Growing up in high school, I lived with my grandpa, or he lived with us, I guess, with my family, and he was from Latvia. So his native language was Latvian, and my grandmother's was Estonian. And so they met during World War II, and they spoke German together because that was their common language. So when I was in high school, for my Latvian grandfather, I wanted to learn a language. He didn't really want to teach me Latvian because he said no one speaks that, but I'll teach you German. So I remember having these, me and my twin sister would have sort of after dinner German lessons with my grandpa, and that's still like my go-to language. It was my second language, and so when I even try to learn a new language, it's like default to German. But being Latvian and Estonian, culturally, I consider myself second generation American. I am now a Latvian citizen, a dual citizen, and I'm learning Latvian, which is totally different.
Since you have experience with Norwegian, Italian, Estonian, Latvian, and German, for you guys, what is one of your favorite words or phrases from? It can be from any dialect or language.
I know mine.
And why is it important for you guys?
I, embracing my Latvian heritage, learned how to say I love you in Latvian, es tevi mīlu. And I taught my kids how to say it, and it like warms your heart where they're just like, es tevi mīlu, and they're trying really hard. So right now, that's my favorite.
Yeah. I overuse cheers, but it's a simple word that everybody gets, and when used out of context where you're not drinking, but you just tell somebody cheers, for some reason they stop and they pay attention, and it brightens their moment. But yeah, I think that's my favorite word.
So as you guys know, we live in a diverse community.
Yeah.
We have people that have different cultural, ethno-racial, and linguistic identities.
Yeah.
What does linguistic diversity mean for you guys?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for me it goes back to stories and owning your own story.
I think one of the reasons why in our time and place we're talking a lot about equity and diversity is there's a lot of conflict. And I also think that most conflict probably comes from miscommunication. When we are speaking to people who maybe don't have the same mother tongue, and they're talking to each other. I think it's really important to take a step back and understand that language is nothing more than a method of communication. And it takes practice to communicate with each other, and it takes time to get ideas from one point to the other. I think linguistic diversity within art is a topic that we're now just breaching. But art being such a great language for recording history or finding out what's really important to a culture and really being that mother tongue of all cultures in a way is a really fascinating thing to study and understand, and also to be aware that my method of speaking that language is just mine and my culture, and it's not somebody else's.
Thinking about linguistic diversity, and you were talking about the languages on the buses and at San Jose State, and sometimes for me it's like I don't know if I feel jealous or something, but like I'm thinking, well, why isn't Latvian and Estonian like listed on there? Why don't they translate? Well, who chooses these languages and who decides like these are the major ones that need to be represented? I would say that the more we can let people embrace their own cultures and identities and their own pockets of diversity, then the more we will be able to accept that.
So one thing we've been talking about doing is understanding kind of what we're talking about. We have had ideas of making sure that we host classes in methods that we will not be able to do, and then bring somebody from a different culture and somebody from a different culture, and have that be a program unto itself, where it's just exploring these different ways and giving everybody an opportunity to come and say, this is the language that I speak, and art, this is my dialect in art, this is my culture, I'd like to share it with you. And I think that would be a really fun conclusion to this idea.
Well, thank you for having me here today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
It was a nice interview.
Nice to meet you. Pleasure to talk
Nice to meet you,
Thanks,
Oli.
Michael.
Nice to meet you, Dana.
So is English your mother tongue, or is it
Spanish?
Spanish is your mother tongue?
For the second interview, we visited the Japanese American Museum of San Jose. The interviewer is Gina Trang. The interviewees are Linda Gomi and Chris Hioki.
Hi Linda, hi Chris. Thank you for having me here today for this interview.
So the Japanese American Museum of San Jose, or we say JAMS for short, grew out of a farming research project. From that project, grew to tell the stories of Japanese immigrants in this area. The mission of the museum is to collect, preserve, and share the history, culture, and art of Japanese Americans.
The museum has been around for 35 years. We started out as the Japanese American Resource Center. So one of the main reasons for the existence of the museum is we would like to prevent the unlawful incarcerations of any American citizens in the future.
This is all very interesting, and thank you for sharing with us your history, especially the role that the museum plays in educating the public of preventing this dark history happening again. Now, with the current role that the museum plays, would you mind telling us the important role that the museum plays in the city of San Jose?
It plays a very important role being located here in Japantown. Prior to World War II, there were more than 40 Japantowns across California. Now there are only 3, and of those 3, San Jose is the only one that's in the same place. The others were relocated after the war. So being here in the community is very important.
That's a great point, Linda. So being in Japantown it allows us to keep the rich history of San Jose Japantown alive.
Thank you for sharing with us the history and the significant role that the museum plays in the community. Now, thinking of the current role that the museum plays, can you share with us any specific exhibits that you're focusing on?
Yeah, we've got a great exhibit. You want to come see our barracks?
Yeah.
This is the barrack exhibit. This exhibit was built using the actual Army blueprints from the Tule Lake Relocation Center. We're standing in the same space that 120,000 internees lived in during World War II.
These barracks were built by Jimmy Yamaichi, and Jimmy was one of the 4 founders. The other founders were Ken Iwagaki, Eiichi Sakue, and Gary Okihiro. One of the things about this museum is a lot of the visitors are actual incarcerees, and to see them when they come in and see the museum, it's very touching and very moving to them. It brings back a lot of experiences.
As a visitor, you can definitely feel the experience of those who were incarcerated, and this is part of our history that we shouldn't forget about. Language is personal, so I hope you don't mind me asking you a personal question.
No problem.
What would be your linguistic backgrounds?
So in school, I studied German, French, and Spanish. I grew up in the South in St. Louis, Missouri, so among my friends we had some Southern expressions that we used. And I lived in Japan and used Japanese.
So you're very multilingual. So how do you incorporate that using Japanese in your daily life, and what does it mean to you?
So my children were both born in Japan, and it was very important for my husband and I to model being a person who speaks multiple languages. Our children come from two cultures that are monolingual, which is not the norm in the world, but makes it very difficult to have two cultures that don't expect you to speak other languages. So it was important for our children to see us speaking multiple languages.
I'm Sansei, and Sansei is third generation Japanese, but I only speak English. About the third and fourth grade is I was, I'm going to say, forced to go to Japanese school, but I went with all my friends and, you know, all my buddies, and we just didn't really study very much, so I didn't learn a lot of Japanese, and so that, you know, right now I only speak English.
Third generation Japanese don't speak Japanese?
There are a lot of Sanseis I know who speak English only.
Now, as board members of the museum, what are your views on linguistic diversity? So, like, does the museum promote linguistic diversity in the community?
We worked with a cloud-based service during the pandemic so that you can use your phone and scan a QR code and get a translation of some of the placards, the explanations of exhibits in the museum. We have tours in Japanese as well as in English, and we're currently working on a project to have a tour in sign language.
Would you like to share with us your favorite word or phrase and why it is your favorite word or phrase?
My grandfather grew up in a German-speaking household until World War I, when his family stopped speaking German. As an adult, he relearned German, and he loved to share some of the things that he was learning. One phrase that made a huge impact on me was the phrase Feinschmacker. He said that to be called a Feinschmacker, you had to eat 3 bites of each food on your plate. Even if you knew you didn't like that food, you had to try it again. So Feinschmacker became more of a life philosophy. You were a person who tried things. You were open-minded was what it finally came to mean to me. And I taught my children to be Feinschmackers as well. And so my grandfather kind of lives on through that word and phrase.
The phrase that sticks with me a lot is shikata ganai. And shikata ganai translates to "it cannot be helped." This was what a lot of the internees used when they were incarcerated, just to keep them going. You know, it cannot be helped. My parents used to always use that phrase with me, especially when I got, you know, a little whiny. If something didn't work and be complaining, is they would always say shikata ganai. Just kind of go through it. It kind of sank into me. I kept hearing it a lot after I started volunteering at the museum. People would say that, and it came back. I realized that there's just so many things that, you know, that's the way it is. You just move on. So I find myself always going back to that phrase, you know, shikata ganai.
So thank you for sharing with us the history of the museum, the significant role that the museum plays, and your personal stories with language. We surely learned a lot today, and we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Our last interview took place in the San Jose State University campus. The interviewer is Rosa Lin. The interviewee is Priya Das of Mosaic America.
Hi Priya, thank you so much for lending us some of your time today for our interview.
To start off, could you tell us a little bit more about your organization?
So I'm the co-founder of Mosaic America, and what we do is bridge building. We build communities by building belonging. And essentially what we do is welcome every culture that has made its home in San Jose to come share and participate and co-create cultural expressions. And so in the last few years, Mosaic America has worked with 30 plus different cultures, participated with 10,000 different people across many different events across Silicon Valley.
That's really great. Why do you think it's important to use art as a medium?
we're all so used to labels, right? I am an Indian American, you are a student, and yes, these labels make us feel safe, but some of the times these labels are actually what keeps all of us apart, right? The heart of our programming is what Martin Luther King Jr. said, which is that we may have come on different ships, but we're all in the same boat now. And so when we are trying to portray an idea that community must transcend label, that community must belong to place, then we need a bold language, right? A language that will cut across all barriers, and that is art, right? And so when an artist, uses ancient rhythms, contemporary melodies to portray their culture, that is echoed in many different cultures, because essentially the human experience, such as joy at births and weddings, sorrow at death and separation, all of us humans experience it in the same way, which is why we felt that art is the most important language that we have to use.
Your perspective really resonates with us. In San Jose, there are many languages that are spoken that aren't English. How does this multilingual environment inspire your group's performance?
This diversity, this multilingual environment is the sole reason for our existence. How do you bring people together when they speak so many different languages? And that kind of goes back to why we use art as a way of bringing people together. Diversity is usually used as a way to separate, as a way to highlight differences. Very rarely is diversity used as an opportunity to learn or an opportunity to include, and that's exactly what Mosaic America does. We want to engage with the diversity and bring people together.
If you don't mind, do you think you could share a little bit about your own linguistic background?
I grew up in India. I come from a community that is supposed to have come to India from the north many, many, many generations ago, and the language that we speak is actually a dialect. We have no script, and it's called Konkani. Going to school in a state called Maharashtra, I had to learn the state language, which is Marathi, and then we had to learn the national language, which is Hindi. And then I got married, and my husband's side of the family speaks Sylheti, which is a dialect of Bengali. Sylheti is now spoken in what is now Bangladesh. I learned classical vocal from a region where the dominant language is Kannada. I learned dance from a culture whose dominant language is Tamil.
Dance is one of my favorite things to learn about when it comes to sharing cultures. So you said the dance you learned is from a cultural tradition that predominantly speaks Tamil?
Yes, it's from South India, and it's called Bharatanatyam. And since I didn't know Tamil, I had to get every poem translated. But that's the fun of it, right? And here, let me show you something. So what I just did in Bharatanatyam was that you and I and all of us are happy when we are together.
Wow.
Right? And so that's the whole point of dance, of movement, of poetry, that it brings together humans based on common human experiences.
So I want to ask, what does having such a diverse and multicultural background mean to you?
You know, Rosa, I cannot imagine not knowing, all these languages that I do know. And I truly believe that once you understand the language of a person, or the very fact that they speak a different language, means you are honoring that, yes, they are an individual, that they have their own history, own identity, and own culture. So in that sense, it's very important. But also at times when I'm stressed, turn on the radio and I listen to a station that I don't understand the language. And so I just let myself float on the music that is unfamiliar, because the rise and ebb of the vocals is enough of a human connection for me.
Yeah, indeed. I think sometimes it's important to pay less attention to what sets us apart and more to what brings us together. And I think music is a really great reminder of that.
Oh, absolutely.
So for our last question, we'd love to know, What is your favorite word or phrase and why it might be significant to you?
Let me go back to my roots, my mother tongue, Konkani.
It goes like this, Hoon utka ghotu. And what that means is, literally, it means I've taken a gulp of really hot water, right? And so it's in your throat, and you can't spit it out because it's too far down, and then you're afraid to swallow it because you don't know what it's going to do, right? So literally, you're stuck, or you don't know what's going to happen next, or you don't know, what the unintended consequences of your actions are.
Thank you so much for being with us today. It's been an honor learning about Mosaic America, and your visions and your projects have been very inspiring.
Oh, thank you, Rosa. The pleasure is all mine.
We certainly learned a lot from these interviews. We learned how languages and dialects are part of our identities and heritages, and how each of us contributes to the colorful linguistic and cultural landscape of our society. We are yet to find out what range of experiences and perspectives our community members have. But one thing for sure is that we are learning more reasons to value our languages and dialects, and to speak our mind freely in our own unique accents. I hope this dialogue continues.
We surely learned a lot today, and we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
you
you.
very much.
Oh, thank you, Rosa. The pleasure is all mine.
Well, thank you for having me here today.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure.
It was a nice interview.
Nice to meet you. Pleasure to talk to
Nice to
you.
meet you,
Thanks,
Yoni.
Michael.
Nice to meet you, Dan.
So is English your mother tongue or is it
Spanish.
Did you like the video? Wow. And I love this video so much. And I'm so thankful for the wonderful video producers, Jake Olhausen and Justin Lee, and the filming crew members, Tak Gupta and Kyle Dimick. Now, the end of the video, I said, let's continue the dialogue. That was my hope, right? So let's talk. Okay, everyone, thank you so much for coming. It's so good to see you again. To start with, will you mind introducing yourself to the audience? Can I start from Linda?
Okay. Hi, I'm Linda Gomi. I have a master's in teaching English as an international language, and I'm a board member at the Japanese American Museum. So my spoken languages are English and Japanese.
Priya?
Oh, I'm as you just saw,
Yes.
I'm the co-founder of Mosaic America. You know what we do. You will see some of what we do. Stay till the end, 5:45. We're going to bring together a multilingual and multicultural experience. My linguistic background, as you just heard, I speak many Indian languages. I also did learn Japanese for a little bit and German for a little bit. And then the journey continues, right? We're in such a rich environment, so it just continues.
Okay, hi, I'm Gina Trang, and I'm a graduate student in linguistics, in the linguistics program. And in terms of my linguistic background, my heritage language is Vietnamese, and then I learned Mandarin Chinese and Cantonese, not fluently, and I also learned Japanese as well.
Michael?
All right, so my name is Michael Krumenacker. I'm an undergrad of the linguistics department, and I speak Spanish and English.
Rosa?
Hi, I'm Rosa. I'm a graduate student. I'm graduating this semester actually in Linguistics and TESOL. I grew up speaking Mandarin Chinese as a first language until I started learning English in school, but the only language I use at home is Chinese, so I would say that I'm probably equally fluent in both.
Thank you. It was interesting that Gina and Rosa could share with us not only the languages you speak, but the languages your family members speak. Do anybody have any languages that you do not speak, but you have a very close connection with, and for any reasons?
So Spanish, learning Spanish brought me great joy as studying abroad, and then later when I did my student teaching But since learning Japanese, whenever my brain tries to access some Spanish, my high school French and German comes out. So I don't count it as a spoken language anymore, but still a hard language.
You know, I know exactly what you mean, because when I got married, which was many years ago, the entire family, the extended family, spoke Sylheti, like you heard, but it's a dialect of Bengali, which has a rich history and literature and art and everything. But so I learned it, right? And then I speak with my in-laws in that language. But sometimes when I'm kind of faced with a person who speaks Marathi or Hindi, the other childhood languages that I grew up with, I have that same problem. And I'm thinking that maybe because it's structurally those languages are similar, and our aging brains. Sorry to put you in my own aging bracket.
It's been happening for a long time, so.
But it's fascinating because then you kind of see, oh, you know what? This is the same structure in this language as the other. So it's been really interesting.
If I may add, for myself, I have had like a lot of exposure to Tagalog because of my girlfriend of 6 years, so it's kind of like a similar situation to you. So when we go to like the family parties, everyone over there is speaking Tagalog. So it's a lot.
Yes. But immersion really helps.
Oh,
if you're immersed and you're left with no option, it's kind of simple. That
And the language do connect us, and it's a wonderful thing. Yes. Now let's talk about the interviews. I would like to ask student members, because all of you did interview last semester and it's been about several months past. Is there any moment or any experiences you had, some story you heard or some reaction you had which was so impactful and then still stands out in your mind to this day? Anybody wanna try sharing that experience with us? Gina?
Yeah,
please.
I could go. So I think throughout my interview and also thinking about my own personal connection with the language, I thought of how much history impacts our own connection with the language, how it can either strengthen our connection or make it a little bit more weaker as well. And depending on how good or bad of the history of whatever it still shouldn't, stop us from whatever we want to learn, as long as we put more action towards our connection with language.
Yeah, language is a mirror of history and society. Thank you. Yeah. Any other thoughts from Rose?
I can go. So for my interview, I think the one idea that stood out the most was that dialects can come out or be expressed in art. And you usually think about an artist having their own style, but you don't necessarily think about how they can have a dialect and symbols that we take and we understand for our own self may mean something entirely different for them.
Interesting. Yeah, we learn the dialects and the accents in art form. Mm-hmm. And the art form is a symbol, language is symbol, visually and also vocally. Mm-hmm. So it was very interesting learning we had. Yeah. Rosa, would you like to add something?
I think what stood out for me a lot personally was I'm personally drawn to learning a new culture or a new language if I'm drawn in by their art or their music. So I was actually, it felt like fate almost to be interviewing Priya because we talked a lot about music and dance, and it's actually really motivating to see people be really passionate about music and dance and kind of utilize that as a way to share their heritage that they're really proud of, and use that to kind of share that with other people.
Yeah, we also learned passion. So Priya and Linda, thank you so much for teaching us the history, the language, and passion, and everything.
It started with you, Reiko.
Thank you.
Your passion for this project.
Thank you. So now I would like to ask a question to the interviewees. Again, it's been a while, and we want to continue learning from you. So I would like to ask you, is there any idea that occurred to you between the time we had the interview and now, so that you can share with us today? Any post-interview thoughts?
So first, I'm just so honored to be included in this project where multilingualism, language diversity is being celebrated. At the Japanese American Museum, we're often talking about loss of language, particularly after the Japanese American community is leaving the concentration camps at the end of World War II. The elders are saying to the children, no more Japanese, it's gone. And so any children born after World War II had very limited contact with Japanese language. So it's great to celebrate.
Yes.
And so just recently I was watching the World Baseball Classic, and the MVP player Shohei Ohtani was being interviewed, and he had just this amazing point that I immediately took from baseball and applied to language diversity. So he shared that he was very honored to have learned here while playing in the US with some of the best baseball players in the world, and to have learned from them, and then been able to combine that with what he had learned in Japan. And so in terms of language diversity, we don't have to say that there's one best language. We get to take from many cultures and express ourselves in many wonderful ways. And so thanks to Shohei Ohtani and baseball.
Yeah, language don't have to compete with each other. Sometimes we hear people saying a good language, not so good language, or we don't have to compare that, right? We can just celebrate all languages. And thank you, Linda, for that inspiration. And Priya?
Yeah, so I'm a mother, right? And then my children grew up here. I grew up in India, where you're kind of immersed in this multilingual, where it is okay for your neighbor to have a different language. You will frequently see street signs in 3 or 4 of maybe even more languages, right? But here, everybody's kind of become mono, right? And so it started to get me thinking about also something that you said, Linda, about how you learn language by listening to the sounds, right? And ultimately, language is sounds, right? You try and imitate the sound, and out comes language, right? And what's interesting to me as I watched my children grow is that they had a specific accent the first 5 years of their life. Then they start going to school, and now they sound American, and we don't, right? So I don't, right? So I get corrected a lot. Like it's girl, not girl. It's not vodka, it's vodka. And I may be saying it wrong, right? I'm learning, right? But then, it's fascinating to me as if I meet another Indian anywhere in the world, my accent immediately becomes Indian, where every syllable and phonetic is pronounced, because that is that's the path to Indian languages. You have to pronounce everything that's written. But if I'm talking in English to a fellow Indian, I use the British accent, right? I say P-A-R-K is park. But here in America, it is park, where the R is kind of rolled. So it's fascinating to me how I change. And it's not because I don't have a sense of self. I do have a sense of self. But I want to feel community with the person that I'm with. And there's nothing wrong with that either.
No.
Yeah, so I was just doing a lot of thinking.
It's interesting, multilingual, multi-dialectal, multi-accentual people can switch those ways of speaking and then instantaneously connect with everyone. Yeah, that's so interesting. Thank you. At this point, I think maybe we can invite our audience member to ask maybe 1-2 questions. So anybody?
This is more for the interviewees, but also for the interviewers. Priya, you did a dance form, and Linda, you look at a lot of Japanese art. Do you find that learning about a new art form or learning how to do it shares a lot of similarities with learning a new language?
Yeah, yes, definitely, definitely. Especially and you'll see some of the dance that I learned, later during the event. That's why I'm dressed the way I am. I'm in costume right now. Yeah, definitely understanding something else, the approach to it, you're a learner. That itself, you approach something from a place of humility, right? That itself is the opening of all doors. And that itself kind of puts you in touch with the history of whatever it is that you're learning, right? And that history then connects you to who you are today, And then when you talk, like I'm talking to you now, we are kind of seeding the future, right? So language is whether it is spoken, felt, instinctively understood, or used or abused, right? It's a link from the history to the future.
I thought it's very interesting, Priya, you mentioned humility. Different dance forms and genres, depending on a genre or particular tradition, the symbolism, the meaning of the movement, the symbolism might be different. Just like across the culture, some word can mean positive thing or negative thing or neutral things. And then it was also discussed in a video. Michael interviewed Yori and Dana, and you were talking about even a very popular art form such as painting. The symbolism, the color or symbolism, the shape can be different. And then being exposed to those differences, range of variations, will make us kind of like, humility type. Yeah, so this is very interesting idea. Thank you. And thank you for asking this awesome question. Anybody want to ask another question?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. First, I wanted to introduce myself. My name is Alejandro, and I'm a Spanish teacher at a public library in New Jersey. And I wanted to first start by applauding for doing this. This is great. This is something that we need. It's a great opportunity to embrace culture, identity, and language. So I adore this so much. Speaking of your mother language is a way to connect with your roots and celebrate who you are, like your grandparents, and right behind, it's like they're right behind you whispering the words. I try to see it that way. Like in my case, I'm Mexican, Spanish, and Portuguese, so I kind of have like all those three, and super proud of it. I try to speak it all the time. And on the other hand, I need to admit, I must say, that I was pretty shocked when I first moved here, and seeing, for example, like words like the university, San Jose, that they don't put the accent, they don't put the tilde, and it's huge in our languages. In a lot of the Romance languages, skipping accents, it's huge, because it changes the whole dynamic of the thing, of the meaning of the word is different. There's a very specific case. I moved to Sunnyvale. I live in Sunnyvale now. And there's a name of the street that's Año Nuevo, all right? But instead of having the little hat on the top of the N, like we do in Spanish, it was Ano Nuevo, and that means new anus. So it's a little bit different. I went to talk to the municipality, and within 3 days they changed it. Because they realized that it means a complete different thing, So having such a university with that element of skipping a tilde, I think it's huge. And it's also very inconsistent, because in some signs you see that it says San Jose with the accent, and in other ones you don't see it. Like a month ago, I talked to someone I think he was like a teacher at the university, and he agreed with it, and he was like, we need to change that, because it's different. If you don't see the accent, if you don't see the tilde, you would say San Jose. Even the intonation is different, San Jose. Whereas if you see the accent, it's San Jose. So I think it's very important to respect languages.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yes, thank you. It has also occurred to me, and I think we'll bring that up in more discussions.
I just want to comment on the previous commentator. You must be somebody working for the Chronicle, because just in recent days there was an article where they are proposing to the governor of California, why is it that you can put apostrophes for O'Malley, etc., but you can't put the tilde over the end? So it's very interesting what you were saying. You should add your voice to that. Thank you.
Yes, and thank you, Alejandro, again, adding your voice, because there are more than 7,000 languages spoken in this world, and then none of us know all those languages. That means we have to learn from each other, and really thank you so much for adding your voice. Yes. Before we move on to the next program, just one last question. Can you tell us just one word, okay? What word comes to your mind when you think about the linguistic diversity in our community? Maybe from, yes, you. Gina?
Sorry. Yeah, the first word that comes to my mind is community.
Thank you. Community. Michael?
For myself, I would say the first word is connection.
Connection. CNC, community connection. Rosa. Say anything.
Optimism with a C.
Clear optimism.
I want to go with the O word too, opportunity.
Opportunity, great, thank you. So we have 2 C's and 2 O's.
Oh
no. Okay, I have to break the pattern. I'll say energy.
Energy, great, thank you. Community, and then connection, and opportunity, optimism, and opportunity, and energy. Great, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Now this is the time for discussion for the campus events. Okay, so on campus there are many activities and events we tried it. So the first campus activity was the information and activity table on November the 8th. Here for our special thanks goes to the LLDSA officers, Stephanie and Huang, and the volunteer members, Kreina and Gabriel, for the collaboration. I also want to thank associated students for lending us the event equipment. Our table was filled with colorful student productions. There were hex badges, these hexagonal stickers, which were used as thank you gifts for the visitors. And those badges were designed by Rosa. And she also designed the event flyer. Another student production was the infographics. This image shows that the language courses are offered in San Jose State and self-identified ethnicities of our students. It also shows the percentage of languages spoken at home in the city of San Jose, in Santa Clara County, and in California, based on the Census Bureau's public information. Huang and I collected the data and shipped them into the beautiful infographics. For the activity at the table, we asked all visitors what languages they speak and to share with us one of their favorite words in any languages. Our visitors attentively filled the activity boards and engaged with our crew members, talking about their languages and the meaning of their favorite word. Soon the activity boards were filled with colorful languages that represent our students' cultural heritages, their families' histories, and their own identities. Our visitors included students, faculty members, staff members, and the family member. It made my heart so warm when we saw a mother of a student came to the table and then talking with us. In a matter of 3.5 hours, about 50 people visited our table and shared with us 45 inspirational words and phrases and 56 pieces of language data. As many of our visitors expressed, we were very surprised to learn how so many languages were spoken in our campus community. The information we could share with the visitors increased, 1 word and 1 visitor at a time. In the following week, we had the second activity, which was an hour-long discussion on the same topic, but in a group setting. We could take only a few photos before and after the discussion. I will share with you with the 2 of them. 12 students participated, even during one of the busiest time of the semester. Participants shared their linguistic background and their language experiences, including what languages and speech style they would use in different conversation situations. And those personal stories will not be shared, but here our participants shared each other their languages and then their favorite word. And even after the event, post-discussion continued. And it was very nice to see students engaging with each other and talking in a relaxed setting. So in this next segment, we want to talk about the survey study. Toward the end of the semester, it was launched. This survey study had 43 questions, and the survey was implemented online with the Qualtrics platform, which was created by Dr. Swan for her course project and shared with us for our use. So our survey was open from November 7th to December 15th. The participants were San Jose State students who were 18 years or older. And in total, 156 students participated, thanks to LLD faculty members and Dr. Corey Brown in the music department, who encouraged their students to take the survey. This survey asked questions such as demographic information, language information, their language use, and the positive and negative experiences based on their language and speech, and their feelings and thoughts on linguistic diversity in our community. Here are some results. First is the native language. To the question, is English your native language? 61% responded yes, and 39% responded no. So keeping this language background of our students and participants in mind, let me share with you just 3 results from the thematic analysis that our student assistants helped doing it. One question asked the participants if they have been treated very positively because of their language, dialect, accents, or language use, and to describe that particular situation. And a variety of responses were given, from which 4 emerging themes came out. First is affirmation of competence when being praised or hearing family members expressing their pride. Second is solidarity, such as speaking the same language or dialect and being treated like a family member from a complete stranger in public. Some respondents went on to describe the outcome of speaking the same language or being multilingual, such as smooth communication and receiving agreement immediately without argumentation, and being able to help others. Lastly, these positive situations tended to occur when the listener noticed the speaker speaking the same native language or same dialect, and then those cues are picked up by the particular words and phrases that might be signaling the particular regional or ethnic dialect. This is the bonding between listeners and speakers. Negative experiences. The same 4 themes emerged from negative experience responses, but in the opposite direction. So first is negation of competence, such as being treated as a disfluent speaker or being mocked. Some respondents wrote about their feeling of out of place, I'm not belonging here, and others also wrote about their experience of not trusted with what they said just because of the way they are speaking. And these experiences tended to occur when the listener noticed language and dialect that differ from their own. And interestingly, the term pronunciation appeared both in positive and negative experiences, but the term accents only appear in the negative experiences. Although many of our respondents had negative experiences, but when they were asked to write 3 words that come to mind when they think about the future of linguistic diversity in San Jose, almost all responses were positive words. And this slide shows the 6 largest concept clusters from the thematic analysis. Taken together, our respondents appear to think that in the future, San Jose will be more linguistically diverse with growing language use and inclusive practices, which is a good and exciting thing because it means that San Jose will be a city where people who speak different languages live in harmony. So I feel this is our student collective hope. Now we want to move on to the next program. Curricular integration. Curricular integration was employed in 4 classes. including lower division, upper division classes, and the graduate seminar. And Dr. Swan and Dr. Cheng will tell us about their curricular integration in a minute. Right now, I would like to share with you what Dr. Koo did in his class, because he's on sabbatical leave right now and he's out of country. So this is Linguistics 111. Introduction to Linguistic Phonetics class. This class covers speech articulation, basic acoustics, and articulatory and acoustic description of speech sounds, among other things. Dr. Koo designed original term project where students would characterize different English accents objectively and reflect on perceived dichotomy between native and foreign accents. His students first performed qualitative analysis of recorded English speech from native English speakers and native Korean speakers who speak English as the second language. They also listened to KQED talk show on the topic of technology to remove foreign accent. And students wrote a reflective essay to discuss the social context in which such technology was developed and the implication of that technology itself. And this is a fascinating project, and sharing ideas of engaging course assignments is a key element of curricular integration. So I really thank Dr. Koo for sharing with us this original assignment. Now, I would like to welcome Dr. Swan and Dr. Zheng for their curricular integration. So first, Dr. Swan from Linguistics and Language Development Department.
Thank you, Dr. Kataoka. Okay, thanks for coming, everyone. So like Dr. Kataoka said, I teach 2 courses in Linguistics and Language Development, which are actually courses I authored, meaning proposed and taught for the first time, that are related to linguistic diversity. I mean, fully centered on linguistic diversity. The first is Ling 26, Quantitative Reasoning in Linguistic Diversity. That's what I'll be focusing on today, or the curricular integration I did for this project in that course. It's a lower division course, meaning usually taken by first-year students. It's considered a basic skills course. It fulfills what is known as an Area B4 general education requirement. Essentially, this is a math class or a quantitative reasoning class. So it's often taken by students in their first semester on campus. And the curricular integration that I included for this project was through using the linguistic diversity survey that Dr. Kataoka just introduced, and having students conduct their own data analysis using the methods they have learned for descriptive statistics and inferential statistics in the course. I also teach Ling 167, which is multilingualism and language contact. It's an upper division course that serves primarily linguistics majors. Some of my former students are in this room, yay. It's an exploration of both individual and societal aspects of multilingualism. And in that course, I also implemented a curricular integration using an interview project, not dissimilar to the one that Dr. Tseng will mention next. Okay, so some background information, some things that we work on building over the course of a semester in Ling 26. This was not just with the focus of this project, but this is through every homework assignment and every piece of data analysis that students do throughout the entire course. We look at authentic data. We look at data that are collected from students in the class, from their peers, from census reports, from our community here in Santa Clara County. We established the fact that Santa Clara County is highly linguistically diverse, both in terms of the number of individuals who speak languages other than English, but also in terms of the number of languages that are spoken. The majority of languages attested in Santa Clara County are spoken by very few people. Rates of English proficiency are also not equal across the groups with different linguistic backgrounds. So for example, some linguistic communities in Santa Clara County have high rates of bilingualism, meaning they are very proficient in English and also the heritage language of the community. In other linguistically defined groups, this is less the case. We also established the fact that both heritage and home languages, which I'll refer to henceforth as HL, proficiency in these languages and English proficiency both have very important links for immigrants and their descendants. HL proficiency, or proficiency in the parents' and grandparents' language or languages, is linked to self-esteem and identity formation and support from family, right, and one's community. English proficiency is also important, of course. It correlates with socioeconomic well-being and social integration. We also establish important differences for students who have heritage language exposure between using language orally out loud as a speaker and acquiring literacy skills in one's heritage language. The opportunities and outcomes of acquiring literacy in heritage languages are highly variable, dependent on experience. And in general, literacy skills are harder for individuals to acquire in their heritage language than oral language skills, because they require pretty much classroom exposure or formal education. And in fact, young adults who are asked about their experiences of writing in their heritage language often report lower confidence in writing in their heritage language than they do for writing in English or for speaking their heritage language. And throughout this course, as students interpret the data that sort of establish this background knowledge, they also add their own perspectives, right? Because many of them are members of these communities and individuals who have partly shared these experiences. So in terms of curricular integration, the students in this course collected data using a survey tool, the one created by Dr. Kataoka, that I helped them implement in Qualtrics to make it easy for online distribution. Each student administered the survey to 10 people, which yielded a sample of approximately 250 respondents. The respondents had to be 18 years of age or older, and they had to be SJSU students, and they had to agree to participate in the project. So these data are truly the data of SJSU students analyzed by SJSU students. The students analyzed a subset of the data because 250 is a rather large sample size and might be overwhelming to first-year students. I helped clean and organize these data and returned a subset of the data to students for their analysis. So as their final project in the course, they authored a technical brief of 2 to 3 pages, and they were asked to address 2 specific questions using these authentic data they had collected. The summaries that I will present now are entirely examples of student work on the project. I'm only channeling students' own words, analyses, charts, etc. And these have been anonymized. Here's a little bit of what the survey looked like. It was pretty simple to complete this on a mobile device or a computer. I used a more complex assignment prompt, but to summarize here, I asked students to use their quantitative reasoning skills, both descriptive and inferential statistics, and what they had already learned and knew about linguistic diversity and heritage language use to explain why these particular questions were interesting and what we could learn from this analysis of the following questions. 1, are there differences between speakers from different language backgrounds with respect to how often they experience hearing their friends speak in their heritage language? So how often do they get to experience the joy of sharing that language with their friend or peer community? And the second question was, what factors predict how often someone uses their heritage language? So students conveyed the purpose of the research this way. One said, while many different languages are spoken in California and among SJSU students, some are more than others, and this affects how a person speaks and hears their language. This leads us to wonder, are there differences between speakers from different language backgrounds with respect to how often they hear friends speaking the HL, and what factors predict how often someone uses their heritage language? As one student put it, this is important because it helps us understand what factors lead to heritage language retention, and we can support people in gaining linguistic or language proficiency. Another student said, analyzing the linguistic diversity within this community can help create policies that provide resources to and helps reduce isolation of certain groups of individuals in both school and government settings. So with the methods that they had learned in statistics throughout this semester, students formulated their directional research hypotheses in response to these two research questions. They used SPSS, a software program to produce descriptive statistics, including the mean, median, mode, standard deviations. They created visualizations that were appropriate for the type of data at hand, and they supplemented their descriptive statistics that way. They also conducted inferential statistical testing appropriate for the data in question to confirm or reject their directional research hypotheses. And so they incorporated all of this into an independently authored 2-page research brief. Here's an example of one of the charts created by a student to depict the languages spoken in this sample. I loved the colors, I loved the rainbow theme. So the large red is Spanish, not surprisingly, but here you really get the sense of the point I made earlier about the fact that the majority of the languages are spoken by very few people, right? The fact that the slivers are small in most of the cases means that we have in this sample, and also reflective of the community, few people or many people who speak a language that's not spoken very commonly throughout the sample. And this same information is available in a bar chart form this way, which gives us a better sense of the actual quantitative values involved. So what we see is there was one person, for the majority of languages that were reported in the sample, only one person reported speaking it. That fundamentally changes our experience, right? Spanish, on the other hand, had 12 individuals who reported speaking it. So as students analyzed how frequently the respondents heard their friends speaking their heritage language, they summarized their findings this way. So here there was a mean of between 1 to 5, with 5 being more frequent. And not surprisingly, maybe, the individuals who reported Spanish heritage language background had a higher mean in response to this question. Students interpreted it this way. By comparing the means of the 3 HL groups, we found that Spanish had the highest mean of 3 for a frequency of hearing their friends use the heritage language. However, it also had the highest standard deviation of 1.2, suggesting that there's variability even within that group. Students then conducted an inferential statistical test and analysis of variance. And when they computed this ANOVA, the F value was 3.6. The P value of 0.04 showed that it was statistically significant. So we interpret this to mean that there are significant differences between these language groups with respect to how often they hear friends speaking their heritage language. In answering the question, how often do you use your heritage language, we're looking for what predicts higher use of the heritage language. So here the students explained that they used a multiple linear regression to see what independent variables were predictors of how much a person used their heritage language. The independent variables were the frequency that they hear their family use the heritage language. So does that predict how much an individual uses their language? Or is it the frequency with which they hear their friends use the heritage language? Is it their self-reported understanding of the heritage language? Or their self-reported fluency in the heritage language that predicts how often they'll use the language? Students conducted their multiple linear regression, finding here that there is a significant effect of the frequency with which they hear family use the heritage language. In fact, it's the only independent variable that's proven to be a predictor. And so surprisingly, perhaps a little, even one's self-rated fluency or understanding in their heritage language is not a significant predictor in this model. So students stated the conclusions this way. The findings lead us to believe that Spanish speakers will have an easier time gaining proficiency from being able to hear their language spoken more often among friends. It also shows us that using a heritage language at home with family is one of the most effective ways to maintain language proficiency and cultural connection. And these findings would encourage parents to speak to their children in the heritage language at home to maintain their heritage language use. Students also described their engagement and reacted to the project. One said, "This study only reinforced my belief that we should encourage our families to use their heritage language because it will actually help an individual be more fluent and communicate with others. In places that are linguistically diverse, like Santa Clara County, using languages like Spanish is very common and can be beneficial because it allows for more communication between people. Heritage languages should not have to disappear altogether, but instead continue to be implemented into society." Another said, "Thus efforts should be made to promote and educate our world about language maintenance." Another student said, "I had a good time making this report. Thank you for the interesting final project. Always happy to read that." I want to give my appreciations especially to Dr. Reiko Kataoka for her creativity, scholarship, and relentless work ethic, to the Ling 26 and Ling 167 students who engaged enthusiastically in this learning opportunity and made this presentation possible, and then to the SJSU College of Humanities and the Arts leadership of the AEPG grant program, that's Dr. Kathy Harris, and to all the panelists and audience members for their engagement. Thanks.
That's one for wonderful presentation. Now we have Professor Christina Zeng from Psychology Department presenting her curricular integration.
Thank you, Dr. Kataoka, for that introduction and for the opportunity to be here today. I'm excited to share with you my talk entitled Embracing Linguistic Diversity, a Cognitive Psychology Perspective. I'd like to start by sharing my intellectual roots. I am a cognitive scientist by training, which means that I draw from various fields, including anthropology, linguistics, and psychology, to understand the human mind and the human experience. In my research, I study the psychological mechanisms that underlie how we understand spoken language, and in particular, how we understand spoken utterances despite how vastly different all of our voices sound. In the fall of 2022, I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to teach a course called The Psychology of Language, Psych 237. This was a graduate level discussion-based seminar that included students both from the psychology department here at San Jose State University, as well as students from the Linguistics and Language Development department. Across the semester, we explored various questions, including the following: how did language evolve? How do we acquire language? And how is language represented in the brain? For their final project, the students completed an assignment that served as the curricular integration component for the AEPG. And this assignment consisted of two components: an interview and a synthesis paper. For the interview, students interviewed an individual of their choice who was native speaker of a language other than English. They asked in this interview questions that explored the individual's experiences learning and using the languages that they speak. And upon completion of the interview, they then wrote a synthesis paper in which they interpreted the interviewees' responses through the lens of the literature that we had read throughout the semester. In the next few slides, what I'll show on the left side of the screen are examples of the academic papers that we read throughout the course. And on the right side of the screen are relevant excerpts from the student synthesis papers. From this point forward, the interviewees and the interviewers will be referred to by their first initials. We read a wide variety of literature in this course. So one topic that we read about is portrayed here on the left, which describes and explores the utility of subtitles while watching TV for language learners who are learning a non-native language. On the right here, one student writes in their synthesis paper, the combination of image and language found in video games can develop EMS, the interviewees, English, as according to multimedia learning theory, learners learn better from words and pictures than from words alone. We also read literature that suggested that exposure to multiple accents during infancy can facilitate a young child's understanding of novel accents that they had never heard before. So one student responds, D, the interviewee, reported that now he finds it easier to understand people and that he can respond to their questions more easily. This seems to be a result of being exposed to different exemplars, sound languages, and adjusting his internal model of spoken language. We also read about how speaking a non-native language might affect one's sense of belonging in a community. So one student reacts by mentioning, E's story about her early experiences in the US show that those trying to make a life in a new country can experience a type of quote-unquote othering by those who live there. For the remainder of the talk, I'd like to focus on a specific phenomenon in language acquisition called perceptual narrowing. This is a phenomenon by which infants, regardless of what their native language ends up being, are called universal listeners, in the sense that they are born with the ability to distinguish between subtle sounds in any language. For perceptual narrowing, by 10 to 12 months old, these infants become what we call native listeners because they retain the ability to be able to distinguish between subtle differences within their native language, but they lose the ability to distinguish between subtle sounds in other languages. So, for example, a 5-month-old infant would be able to distinguish between the sounds in any language, including the ones shown on the screen. But by 10 to 12 months old, assuming that the child hypothetically has been exposed primarily to, say, Vietnamese, the child retains the ability to hear, for example, the 6 different tones in Vietnamese, but loses the ability to hear all the subtle differences across the sounds in each of these other languages in gray. So perceptual narrowing was a common theme that was discussed throughout the students' synthesis papers. So one student interviewed a native speaker of German who learned English in the 4th grade. And the interviewee expresses great difficulty in being able to pronounce the TH sound in English. So in the following clip, this is what I will share.
You know, you said you had a hard time with TH.
Oh, yeah.
So like
Still,
where there's times,
Yeah, you can hear that I say more like an S instead of a the.
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 Yeah.
Yeah, that will never go away.
So in this particular student synthesis paper, he writes the following. In German, there is no TH sound, so it would make sense that E would have a hard time producing it. She would never have needed to produce the sound growing up and would have lost the ability to produce the sound or to differentiate it from similar phonemes. Another student interviewed a native speaker of Japanese who learned English in middle school. This particular student chose to play a game with the interviewee, during which the interviewer pronounced certain words in English that included R and L sounds, like fly and fry. And the interviewee was tasked with having to choose which of the 2 words on the screen he thought the interviewer was saying. Japanese does not include a distinction between R and L, so the hypothesis was that the interviewee would, as a native Japanese speaker, have some difficulty distinguishing between, say, fly and fry. So this student later writes in his synthesis paper, more cognitive resources devoted to the native language, Japanese in this case, means fewer resources for non-native languages, English, and began learning English in earnest in middle school. Thus, less resources were devoted to non-native phonemes like R and L. When I first introduced the concept of language diversity to my students in this course, many of them spoke about the extent to which language diversity for them meant the sheer number of languages that are spoken across the world. what I'm hoping to highlight with sharing the concept of perceptual narrowing is that there are many different sources of language diversity, and one of them is the sounds, the language sounds that we are exposed to early in life, because those not only affect what language sounds we are able to hear well later in life, but also the language sounds that we are able to then produce. So stated in another way, the language sounds we hear shape our language learning, and perhaps more broadly, the language sounds we hear shape our linguistic identities. So in the voices of my students, looking into each journey as an English language learner allows us to see the many factors that go into learning a language, and how knowing a language can shape the way we interact with the world around us. Over the semester, the many papers we have read have built on top of one another, and looking at one person's life can exemplify how these many aspects intertwine and affect us as individuals. Another student writes, as a future English as a second language teacher, it's important for me to be able to identify the many moving parts that make up a person's language learning experience. This will help me better relate to my students and be able to tackle their problems with a more informed approach and help me create lesson plans that will be effective and successful. With that, I'd like to acknowledge the Artistic Excellence Programming Grant, and of course, Dr. Reiko Kataoka for her hard work planning this event, the students in my Psychology of Language course, and of course, all of you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Zen, for another illuminating presentation. So now I would like to have a conversation with Dr. Swan and Dr. Zen, and the panelists. Let's have a chat. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. And to start with, can you all please introduce yourself to the audience member? And also, please tell us why you accepted this invitation to join the panel today. Can we start from them, Christina?
Sure, thank you, Reiko. I'm Christina Zhang. I am an assistant professor in the Department of Psychology here at San Jose State University. I study spoken language perception and was very excited by the possibility of participating in this event because I wanted a chance to reflect on the very multidimensional and multifaceted nature of diversity more broadly.
Thank you.
Hi, yes, I'm Dr. Julia Swan. I am a sociolinguist, primarily a sociophonetician, so I study accents, speech sounds, and things that relate to social identity and social justice. I am a second-generation heritage language speaker of Appalachian English and an achieved bilingual in French and formerly Spanish. I am raising a bilingual child and interested in bilingualism broadly in all ways. I find the multilingualism and cultural pluralism of Silicon Valley and Santa Clara County to be one of its most wonderful qualities, and the same in our student population. And I was just very excited to be asked to work on a project that would contribute to that.
Hi, my name is Rosemary Hensey, and I'm a retired professor from the Linguistics and Language Development Department. And I'm very excited to be part of this. I used to teach a class called Culture, Language, and Ethnicity in the US. And I worked closely with Dr. Kataoka during much of that time. We co-taught a couple of times. And so this idea of interviewing people as a student project was also something that I did in that class, and I always felt that that the class and that project really opened doors for the students as well as for me as an instructor, and it enabled us to kind of go beyond the surface conversations that we often hear about diversity in this community.
My name is Manjari Ohala. Everybody calls me Manju, and that's what I ask you all to call me too. I also retired as Professor Emerita from the Department of Linguistics and Language Development. And before I retired, I was also the department chair. I accepted the invitation from Reiko, to participate because as a sociolinguist, I was very interested in the topic of the intersection of language and society, and especially since I grew up in a multicultural, multilingual, multi-language society such as India, where today, to my pleasure, if you go, you get on a flight, the pilot will come on and say, on this flight, we have a speaker in our crew, and they will cite all the languages that the crew speaks, which may be just 2, maybe 5, maybe 10, but they always announce that so that if you need any help in your language, we have somebody to assist you. I look forward to the day that in the United States you can get on the Southwest flight and have the same courtesy extended to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Julia Curry Rodriguez. I am a professor of Chicana and Chicano studies, and I'm a sociologist by training. I study groups, race and ethnicity, and so I'm really happy to be part of this group. I was very excited to be part of it, primarily because I study languages, but I study people, really. So it's not so much the languages that they speak, but rather the way that not every person with every experience in the United States has had the opportunity to celebrate their languages and to be part of the United States, but rather the heritage for us, Chicanas and Chicanos in the United States, has been one of punishment and segregation. And so to use native language was to be punished, criminalized even. And so regardless of that, you have also immigrant groups that replenish the English and Spanish and then create very interesting dynamics in the way that we interact with each other. So this is part of the reason that it's interesting to me to be on this panel, not as a linguist, but rather as a race and ethnicity scholar.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to have all of you for so many different and then good reasons. I have a question to the 3 guest panelists. Can I start from Rosemary? I had the pleasure to teach Link 129 course a few years ago, and I inherit your interview project assignment. And in a class, the class watched the video which you produced. And those activities were the inspiration of this event. So I would like you to tell us a little bit more about the interview, also about your documentary video.
So the interview assignment had sort of a bumpy history. I started teaching that class in 2001 when I first became a professor here. And when I first started, the class itself was partnered with 2 other classes. There was a class in Mexican American Studies and there was a class in Sociology, all of which touched on the topic of immigration. And so it was part of a larger project called the Teams Project. And there were other teams, but that was the one I was on. And so we, as a group, the 3 professors, decided that we would have the students do certain parts of the curriculum together as a unified cross-class curriculum. And so one of those projects was to volunteer for a community organization and write a report about your experiences, keep a journal as you go to your volunteer community experience, etc. So we did that. It was a great burden for many of the students because many of them are, working either part or full time. They have families, they have other obligations, and so this requirement that they have to volunteer at a community organization for a certain number of hours was a little bit much. So then after that, the team project, I don't remember exactly what happened, but it was for a limited time. So I didn't do that again after that, but I did ask my students, now I'm just teaching the class and I don't have to integrate with anybody else. So I asked them to do an ethnography as their major assignment for the class. And that, of course, included a lot of interviewing. And they had to find a place to do their ethnography, a place where they already had some connection. That also was a huge burden because it was very time-consuming. So I got lots of complaints. So then I went back and I modified again and decided that it would be best to just do a single interview. And that seemed to work out really well. And I did get some feedback from students. My assignment for the interview was to interview someone who speaks a language you don't speak. And some of the students said, well, what about if my grandfather speaks Tagalog, but I don't speak Tagalog? Can I interview my grandfather? And at first I thought, well, but that's still, you know, your family. And they argued with me a little bit, some of them, and I said, okay, that makes sense, because you are actually third generation, as we heard. Sometimes you've lost through the process of language attrition. You don't have any command of that language anymore. You never did, actually. And so, you know, why not interview your grandfather or whoever? So in that sense, I think the impact was that the students actually made the assignment better. And I always appreciated them for speaking up. As far as the video, so the video that Dr. Kataoka is mentioning is called Just a Piece of Cloth. And that also evolved from students. It was a different class. And it was during the time, a few years later after 9/11. And so it was around 2008, and there was still a lot of Islamophobia going on in the community, even on campus, and you would read about it in the news, and you know, just a lot of fear and suspicion among majority people about anybody who looks Muslim, including women wearing the hijab. So I had some Muslim students in my class, one of my classes at that time, and the topic came up about wearing the hijab and what it means to them. And there was quite a heated discussion in the class among several of the women in the class. And we all learned a lot from that. So I got the idea then to make that a bigger learning opportunity for other people. So I invited my students who had been involved in this conversation to think about making a video with me. And that's how that video came about. And then we started showing it in some of the classes here. So again, learning from students is my theme.
Thank you. Yes, I'm really appreciative of your student who made the interview assignment the way it is. And that video was a very powerful, impactful video. Thank you, Rosemary. Now, Manju, so I wanted to know your history in San Jose State, so I was looking for some of the archives. And what I found is Spartan Daily, that's a student newspaper. The Spartan Daily article about 20 years ago. And the title of this article is Modest Indian Role Models Share Story. Will you be able to retell that story to us? And if there's any connection to that story and linguistic diversity?
Okay. This was back in 2004, and this was a journalism student. And she interviewed 3 Indians on campus, or people of Indian origin. She herself was Chinese. Or Chinese origin person. So it was very interesting that she did this. And after the interview, she wrote up the article for the Spartan Daily, and in good journalism tradition, none of us saw what was written until it appeared, so we had no ways of correcting anything. And her questions largely had to do with culture, and for me specifically, she wanted to know that, especially since I wore Indian clothes, not Western clothes, had I faced any discrimination on campus in my career because I was, not part of the mainstream. And I assured her that at the university, I never felt in any of my promotions or my teaching career at San Jose State I did not ever encounter any discrimination. And as far as my students are concerned, in fact, at that time, close to the 2004 time, some of the students had commented very favorably, saying that they felt that since I was willing to accept my cultural differences, and I dress different, I would also accept their cultural differences, which was, of course, true. To add to that, I would simply say that since the panel today is about linguistic diversity, first of all, of course, linguistic diversity and cultural diversity, are intertwined. And maybe also, in my thoughts at least, it would be useful to clarify what is meant by linguistic diversity. Basically, it means a different way of speaking. And even monolinguals speak differently at different times. They vary between formal speech and casual speech. Nobody speaks exactly the same way all the time. However, usually it has come to mean where different languages are represented. Okay? So it's not just style differences within a language, but presence of different languages. And my own awareness of such differences and people's attitudes towards them started at age 5 back in India. I went to an English medium school which was run by Anglican missionaries, and we were punished if we spoke our mother tongue instead of English. And I should mention that this was long back. India had just become independent from Britain, so it didn't, this policy was not perpetuated, but it was there when I went to school, and it just made me much more determined to retain my mother tongue. Yes, I learned English, and I could speak English with everybody in my classes, but I retained my mother tongue. And of course, my disciplinary field, linguistics, allowed me to pursue my interest in linguistic diversity. And as is clear to everybody, I think in this audience, we need to recognize that linguistic diversity is here to stay, both, in the US, but also all over the world. When people move from one country to another, we are going to get linguistic diversity. And we should be, it's a good thing, we should be proud of it. Of course, it has to come hand in hand with bilingualism at least, maybe multilingualism, because there has to be what decades ago sociolinguist, very famous sociolinguist, called the flow of communication. You have to be able to communicate in a society, so you cannot simply remain within one language if there are other people there who speak different languages. And I joined San Jose State in 1974, before many people here probably were born. But ever since that time, our classes have always been diverse. And it's just the populations represented in the diversity have been different. When I started, a lot of the students were from Iran. And that was the immigration pattern then. Then in the 80s, there were more people from Chinese origin. And now, of course, as you all know, there are many more different types of Spanishes represented in classes. It's not, students don't speak the same Spanish. They speak different varieties of Spanish. So we should always, value diversity and be proud of it. So that's all I would add.
Thank you, Manju. I really appreciate your students teaching us the expression of our own culture is also an expression to our readiness to be open to any other cultures. So it is very resonating. Thank you. Now, Furia, you are amazing person professionally and individually. So you are a distinguished professor and scholar in the field of Chicana and Chicano studies, and you are mentor and advisors to your students. You lead many professional organizations, and you are a leader of shared governance in our campus and also entire CSU system. Now, focusing on your role as a mentor to your students, will you be able to share if you remember any stories or any experiences of the student where students express some challenges and then difficulties culturally, linguistically, which they had to overcome to become successful student and happy individual?
Thank you, Reiko. You're very kind. I find myself listening and responding inside and changing everything that I want to say. And I want to say, I think the connection I want to make is this new requirement that we have on our campus, Area F, Ethnic Studies. And the reason for that is that definitely, as all of my colleagues have said, language is just part of who we are and part of how we communicate. And there are many diverse ways in which we experience communication. So as somebody who studies race and ethnicity and somebody who was very excited about the introduction of an ethnic studies requirement, even though for many people it's very stressful, it's really about coming to grips with how do we relate to each other in terms of our differences, but not necessarily pushing people away, but rather thinking, is it possible to begin from difference to get to a place of commonality? And I think it is. And I think that one of the things that I have witnessed at San Jose State and previously at other universities is how people relate to each other, often not in very good ways. Through assumptions about who we are and what we are, the way we look, and what we ought to be like. And I can say that in terms of Spanish, for example. I am a Spanish speaker. I'm an immigrant. I realized very recently ago that when I started college, I really was an immigrant student. I'd only been in the US 7 years when I started college. But I didn't think of myself that way. And so we go through changes in terms of how we relate to each other and to ourselves. And sometimes that relating is defensive. It's, I speak English, of course I do. I speak Spanish, but my Spanish-speaking mates, that is the ones that I assume should speak Spanish, don't speak Spanish like I speak it. And so then what do I do about that? So it's this constant weaving of relations that is very, very difficult. So what I come down on is that we're never really truly monolingual, and we're never really truly monocultural. We're instead an amalgamation of various pieces that sort of connect us, and the desire to talk to each other and to perhaps engage with each other is what makes us communicate and figure out a way to say, how can my heart join yours? Mm-hmm. How can my hunger and your hunger come together? And that's one of the really difficult things that I see. So I want to tell you about an experience that I had when I first arrived at San Jose State, which was in 2000. I was walking past what was then Clark Library, and there was a white presenting woman teacher and an Asian presenting, male presenting young man, taller than the woman. And she was going like this to him and telling him, if you would only practice your English, you would get better. I remember feeling really shocked. That shouldn't happen in 2000. It shouldn't happen today, but it is exactly what I study, how people try to be part of American society of the United States. I very seldom use the word American for the United States. But it's that we live through stereotypes, and we also stereotype, but we don't always recognize that. So for me, as a Spanish speaker, listening to my Chicano kin, the ones that had been here many more years, I had a very difficult time listening to them speak Spanish because they didn't pronounce it like I did. But then, over the years, I have learned that I really love the way that Chicanos speak. And now I am Chicana too, after 50 years of living in the United States. And the words that I learned, like the one that I really love, is this word, trillazo. Me da un trillazo invitarlos a este evento. It gives me a great thrill to invite you to be here. So the Chicanos I met used English words but converted them into Spanish, thrill, trillazo, and did it in that way that really, to me, engages the Mexican cultural integration of people. I invite you to be part of my life. And so to your question, you know, how do I help or think about happiness, and how do I advise students? Let your own trillazo come out. You know, don't be so uptight. Don't correct people. And also don't pretend that you speak what you don't speak. Instead, ask and listen and pay attention to each other, because at the end of the day, that's how we communicate. And it's got to have respect and dignity. And that's important.
Thank you, Furia. And it's really nice to be reminded that we have to be watchful of our own assumption and the stereotypes, because it's so easy to have assumptions, right? Thank you. Now, you know what, time is sort of like coming close to 6 o'clock. So is that okay to invite just one question from audience member? Yes.
All three of the newer guest panelists, you've all talked about how important it is, like, for students to learn how to interact with each other in a linguistically diverse way. How important do you think it is for the languages taught at the university to reflect the student population's linguistic diversity? And also, how important do you think it is for those languages to also reflect the community of the city and county around it?
Manju.
On an emotional level, I think it's very important. On a practical level, it's not going to work. You cannot get universities firing a professor today who teaches us, a particular language just because that language is not spoken in the community anymore. So on an emotional level, it would be very nice if you could go to the university and learn your language, but practically speaking, not a possibility.
Thank you, Manju. But we can still continue talking about it. Yeah? Anybody want to extend on that?
Could we move?
Julia?
I absolutely hear you. Could we move closer in that direction? Could we take steps from where we are now closer to the ideal? What might that look like?
What do you mean by from where we are right now?
Well, assuming that maybe there isn't a match right now between what's being, and I'm not saying I have data on this to pull out, but that there may not be courses offered that fully represent or look like a representative of our community in the university or in the county or, the area that we draw students from. Could we, I don't know, could we add some languages? Could we add other types of support for clubs or structures maybe that wouldn't look exactly like hiring a full-time tenure-track professor and as one language teacher? Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
Partnerships or other things.
Right, I think that's a very creative idea.
Yeah, I want to just respond also in terms of what that, the languages that are taught at the university, that's sort of like telling the world, these are the languages that we respect and value, right? So I think it really gets into that question of power and how languages come to have power beyond just being languages, that people happen to speak because they grew up speaking them. But the power comes in when they become institutionalized, and that's a good case of institutionalization. So I would just ask a further question, which is, which languages in the community that are not being taught here now have lots of speakers, and have, I would presume probably you'd choose languages that are spoken by a lot of people in the community, languages that have some history of literacy, so there's stuff that students could read, etc. So there would be a lot of questions to ask, but I think the ultimate question is about power. Which languages carry that power and why? And does it have to always stay the same?
Yeah, but students have power to change the current power structure. So.
I'd like to add also that I think it isn't so much teaching the languages as it is teaching the people.
Right.
And I think sort of like your diagram that showed that there were very few people that spoke a particular language, but acknowledging that is important. Acknowledging that we can't possibly teach all the languages, but we do see all the people and all of that diversity. And I think that's part of what is really important, and it's and why you can't sort of just say language or culture. It's actually both simultaneously. And I think people do feel erased when it becomes presented as a zero-sum game, right? If you're going to learn ethnic studies, does that mean you're not going to learn something else? And what does ethnic mean, by the way, right? Because everybody has ethnicity and culture, but how do we decide? So it does go back to what Rosemary is saying. It's a power issue, but it's also a representation issue. And it has to be historically situated in terms of what's happened in the past, which people's languages have been erased, which people have been erased. And when we look, then there's people that just simply don't exist anymore because that was part of the colonization effort. And so how do we resolve that? So there, and I guess I would say last that I don't think everything we learn has to be at a university. I think it has to be elsewhere.
Right. Thank you. And then Christina, you have the last word.
One last comment. I think with respect to this emotional acceptance or maybe representation of identity, there's a lot that can be done, I think, by all of us as citizens of the world and not just as instructors in portraying a sense of acceptance that go beyond maybe instilling certain courses on certain languages. In our conversations earlier today, just acknowledging what the pronunciation of a student's name is. That shows a respect for that person as an individual and not just as a student. And I think behaviors like that, maybe, or what Julia were referring to earlier, that stand out and make a difference in how we interact with each other.
May I answer? This is Priya. Reiko is looking at who is this person. So Julia, I love that you said, is there any other way to bring cultures alive? I love what Julio also said about representation. What we're doing, trying to do with Mosaic America, and this is not a spiel, this is something we firmly believe in, right? What is it that represents a community? It's the attire. The most visual representation, apart from your skin color, of course, and your facial features that kind of give away what your background and historical background is. So we bring cultural expressions to as many spaces as we can, including campuses. So we try and bring history alive, right? As you're learning about the indigenous people, actually get the indigenous people. They're not all dead, right? There are people who are trying to preserve, cultivate, pass on traditions. And so we bring these, and in the form of artists and cultural expressions, we are trying to do that. So let's talk.
And let's dance, and then let's sing. And first of all, round of applause to the wonderful, wonderful panel. Thank you.
So what you're going to see today, we talked about languages, right? We talked about communication. Julia said, let my heart speak with yours, let my hunger be yours. We're hoping to kind of ignite that in you. So I'm calling this segment the unspoken, being in brackets, the unspoken power of love, right? So language and communication doesn't have to be just spoken. So the first segment, which I will present, is unspoken. And I want to see if my hunger and my joy and whatever it is that I depict through my body language and my facial expressions carry over to you or not. With that in mind, I'm only going to kind of give you a hint about what I'm going to be presenting. It is a mother
interacting with her toddler child who is just beginning to learn how to walk. And that's the only clue I'm going to give you. Then we have Farima, who is going to present another facet of love in her own way. You want to talk a little bit about it?
Language is also movement. As Maria said, we can move and have a communication with just movement. And the beauty of art, whether it's painting or it's writing or it's dance, is that it's non-spoken, but you get to understand the feeling and get to understand what is being talked about.
Thank you. Through our emotions and through our feelings, through our movement. If we look back in history, we realize that every language that has been spoken now in our modern world, it all had a root, one language. We were all one, just like how human being was all one. So just by traveling and evolution, language changed, but the dot, that little dot of it is all one. I studied linguistic. I graduated from actually San Jose State, so now I am a professor of culture and language and mysticism. So understand that we all come from one root. Language is one. So when you respect the language, you respect everybody. Respect the heart, because language comes from the heart. If you respect your heart, respect other people's feeling and heart, that's all that matters. So respect the heart, respect the other people's heart, because that's their language. It comes from the heart.
Thank you, Farima. And then we have Zaza Korintali, who will share with us.
I have my one. Thanks for everything to having us on the beautiful event. So I think the universal language is music. I'm from Tbilisi, from Georgia, and she's my partner from Caucasus too.
I will now ask for my music. hopefully some of my joy at watching my child walk and on the swing and his tantrums and not accepting the ball and playing with me, all of that communicated to you. Thank you.
Thank you. I will be presenting a dove dance. Dove in many cultures is a sacred bird. I am from a Persian family. I'm half Azerbaijani and half from Iranian. Persian. And dove in our culture represents the mother and unity, because it brings in all cultures and all languages and all feelings together as a sign of peace and unity and love. So I'm going to be doing the dove dance, and hopefully you'll start to see some words through my fingers and my arms and my expression.
Bravo. Thank you. Artwinis magal mtidano inanaida, jilvelo inanaida, tsitel mankanait movalo inanaida, jilvelo inanaida, aritiro sakwarelo nanaida, jilvelo inanaida, tsavalda iswenwen movala nanaida, jilvelo inanaida. მაღლა სვავი ფრენსონანაიდა ჯილველოინანაიდა ქვეშ მიმინო გოგდება ოინანაიდა ჯილველოინანაიდა საყვარელთან თამაში ოინანაიდა ჯილველოინანაიდა გემიხდა შეჭირვება ოინანაიდა ჯილველოინანაიდა ჰაიდა დიდაიდა ოინანაიდა ჯილველოინანაიდა Aida dida voinanaida chilveloinanaida Artvenis magal მთიდანონანაიდა ჯილველოინანაიდა წითელ მანქანაით მოვალოინანაიდა ჯილველოინანაიდა არიდირო საყვარელონანაიდა ჯილველოინანაიდა წავალდა ისვენვენ მოვალნანაიდა ჯილველოინანაიდა Mağla svavi presonanaida jilveloinanaida Kresh mimino gogdeba voinanaida jilveloinanaida Saguareltan tamashi voinanaida jilveloinanaida Gemikhta sheჭირვება voinanaida jilveloinanaida May I show you something? Because we are talking about language, right? So when I will ask about question, you can answer Jilveloi nanaida, right? Jilveloi nanaida. And let's try that. We will count the rhythm together. Oh, that's it. Perfect. Let's make sound, good sound. Magla swavi prensonanaida. Kvesh mimino gogdeba voinanaida. Saguareltan tamashi vonanaida. Gemikhta sheჭირვება vonanaida Haida dida voinanaida Haida dida voinanaida Haida dida voinanaida Haida dida voinanaida Magla swavi prensonanaida Kresh mimino gogdeba vonanaida Saguareltan tamashi vonanaida Gemikhta sheჭირვება vonanaida Haida dida voinanaida Haida dida voinanaida Haida dida voinanaida Haida dida voinanaida Haidi Magla magla swavi prenso nanaida. Kweshmi mino gogde bavo nanaida. Saguarel tantama shivo nanaida. Gemichta shechirve bavo nanaida. Hayda di dai na voida daida. Hayda di dai na voina naida. Hayda di dai na voina naida. Hayda di dai na voina naida. Magla magla swavi prenso naida. Kweshmi mino gogde bavo naida. Saguarel tantama shivo nanaida. Gemichta shechirve bavo nanaida.
In closing, I'd like to express my deepest appreciation for incredible support and help given to this project. Thank you again, our community partners, student assistants, LLDSA, student volunteers, faculty collaborators, participants of the campus events and the survey, students of the participating classes, video production crew, and Mosaic Cross-Cultural Center. We also had many behind-the-scenes support. Thank you very much, Associated Students, Black Leadership and Opportunity Center, Center for Asian Pacific Islander Student Empowerment, Chicanx Latinx Student Success Center, Institutional Review Board, Hammer Theater, Executive Director Chris Burrell, Director of Patron Services Maria Bones, former Director of Client Services Amy Dana, Client Services Manager Jen Porrett, Director of Production Anthony Sutton, Client Services Assistant Veronica B., and everyone who's been involved in today's live event. Special thanks to Anthony and his team who have given us technical support from the beginning to the end, and other staff members who worked from the box office to the studio. Thank you, Hammer Theater, for your professional support. The Department of Linguistics and Language Development, Chair Stefan Frazier, my fellow faculty colleagues and office members, and the College of Humanities and the Arts, my special thanks to Dean Shannon Miller, Director of Public Programming Kathleen Harris, Director of Marketing and Communication Derek Turon, Student Assistant Ramsha Young, and everyone who works to help AEPG project. And today's audience members, thank you for engaging with us. Together we created the meaning of this event, the joy of working together for a common good. Let's continue our work for linguistic diversity in our society. Thank you.